Hello and welcome to this video from Semester Learning and Development. Today we're going to take a look at learning styles. Shortly you'll be looking at your own learning style. We have a couple of online resources for you to use where you can find out a bit more about how you learn most effectively and what that can mean for you moving forward. When it comes to learning, we all learn in very similar ways, but we'll all have ways that work better for us. Some people, for example, like to experiment. They like to try things out. They learn from perhaps trial and error. Whereas some people like nothing more than a nice clear set of instructions telling them exactly what to do. Others still perhaps like to watch YouTube videos or watch somebody perform the action in person. Then they can observe and understand how to do it. Some people like nothing better than a manual or a book to read. Maybe you're one of those people who likes to follow a flowchart or a process. Perhaps you like to try it yourself, but maybe have an expert on hand that you can turn to when you get stuck. Maybe you find the buzz of not knowing how to do something a great motivator, or maybe that lack of knowledge freezes you in your tracks. The important thing to understand first and foremost throughout this topic is that we're talking about preference. So, what do we mean by preference? Well, the easiest way to explore this is to give it a go. So if you're sat at your desk, I'd like you to shuffle back a bit so you've got a little bit of room, and then I want you to cross your arms. And what you'll notice when you've crossed your arms is you'll have one arm that goes over the top and then that hand goes down, and with the other arm it'll come underneath and the hand will come up. So what I'd like you to do now is to unfold your arms and cross them the other way. Now that may take a moment. Occasionally people find it quite difficult, but once you've done it, notice how it feels. Most people tend to say it's a little uncomfortable, it's a little unnatural, it might have taken some time for them to figure out how to do it. This is what we mean by preference. When you cross your arms, most people do it the same way every time. It feels natural and it feels comfortable, but you're perfectly capable of crossing your hands the other way. If that one doesn't work for you, you could try writing your name and then putting the pen in the other hand. And again, most people tend to say it feels quite uncomfortable, quite unnatural. We have these type of preferences in everyday life. When we talk about preference, what we're talking about is what's most comfortable, what's most natural. How do you learn most effectively? How do you best remember things? How do you recall things from your mind? So it's really just about understanding if you know what your preference is, you can adapt your learning to fit and you can make learning easier. As I said, preference is not about ability. You will be just as capable of learning in other ways. So it doesn't mean that you only have one way of learning. You will learn with all of the styles. It is not necessarily even about efficiency. You may have learnt through work or academia to learn very effectively in something that isn't your preference. Okay, so you can be just as good at a non-preference, but it will still take more concentration and effort. The online tests are really simple. You'll have links that you can follow through, a series of simple questions. They're very easy to do. It shouldn't take you long to think about the questions. In fact, the quicker you answer them, the more likely your preference is to show. What we find is if you think too long about the questions, most people start to answer them the way they think that they should, rather than the way that they want to. Each test will give you some results at the end, and that's really just giving you some insight into what your preference is and when you may be most comfortable. There's no catch to these tests, there's no bad results, there's no bad type. You will use all of the styles. This is just about giving you some insight into which ones perhaps come more naturally to you. What we suggest you do is either print off the results, or better still, take a screenshot or copy and paste the content from your web browser into a document and keep that. It's a useful tool for you to refer to, but also as you're going through communications training as a part of your course, you may find it's also a useful piece of evidence. So when you're ready, if you click onto the next lesson, you'll find a link taking you to an online resource that asks you about your learning style, and that's thinking about how best do you gain learning. And then when you've done that one, the lesson that follows will take you to an online tool that looks at your visual, auditory and kinesthetic preferences. And this is really about how do we absorb information and how do we recall things from our memory. Both of these will give you some insight into how you learn, will also help you to identify ways that you can learn most effectively, and will also be useful in the modules that you're currently completing. So when you're ready, please proceed to the next lesson.